All right, so I'm going to call our meeting to order at 7:04 p.m. On Monday, April 26th for Business and Finance. We are recording, although I don't believe we're streaming live, but this will be up on the internet shortly. So before we go to the second item on our agenda, I just wanted to have a moment for agenda keeping. Ideally, we'll do our business tonight. The Thursday meeting, it sort of depends on our discussion. If the discussion tonight leads Dan and Daryl to go off and have work to do, we'll come back and see the progress of their work on Thursday. But if we feel satisfied that we can proceed to the full meeting and make a recommendation, or at least feel comfortable having a conversation on Monday night, we don't need to do the Thursday as well. So the second item on the agenda is public hearing, and first off, I'll see if any members of the public who are on the call with us wish to address the subcommittee. Seeing a shaking head and a blank screen, I'll take that as a no. We do have a statement that I will read to the record that was sent to me by Paul Challenger, who is the chair of the Finance Committee in Holden. He has a statement of Holden Finance Committee re-WRSD assessment. Thank you for this opportunity to address the Business and Finance Subcommittee as you discuss the fiscal year 22 budget and assessments. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I'm presenting the budget to the Board of Selectmen at the same time as your meeting. As you know, this year's assessment to Holden increased $1.7 million, 5.3% from last year. While we are sympathetic to the plight of the WRSD, Holden simply cannot afford to continue paying assessments that increase over 5% year after year without structural changes to our tax rates. In fiscal year 17, Holden had $2.3 million net excess levy capacity, the amount that taxes can be raised without an override. With this budget, our excess levy capacity is now down to zero. We are taxing at the maximum allowed by law now, with no cushion at all. Since fiscal year 17, the WRSD assessments increased by an average of 6.4%. This is not sustainable when tax revenue can only increase 2.5%. The WRSD has grown from being 55% of the town's total budget in fiscal year 2017 to being 60% with this budget, an extraordinary increase in a short period of time. As a point of comparison, Holden also sends students to Montechusett Regional Technical High School. Over the same period of time, the Monty Tech share of our budget increased from 1.7% to 1.9%, mostly attributable to the fact that every year we send more students there. They face the same educational pressures as Wachusett, the same state funding issues, the same personnel expense issues, and yet they have been able to maintain a stable assessment per student. Why can't Wachusett achieve this? This year's municipal budget for Holden was kept very lean. Most employees received only 1% raises. Capital expenditures were reduced substantially, investment in the savings funds were reduced, and other austerity measures were implemented that cannot be repeated in future years. We still wound up using every available tax dollar to be able to present a balanced budget after the WRSD assessment was received. With our ability to raise taxes more than 2.5% gone, if Wachusett continues this trend, then next year we will face a stark choice: significantly cut the municipal budget or the school budget, or have a successful override vote. There is no more capacity to absorb exorbitant increases. We understand that this huge assessment increase was driven by a reduction in state aid, which is out of your control. That does not change the reality that Holden cannot replace the missing state funding without significantly raising taxes. It is true that Holden has financial reserves that it has saved up over the years. However, it would be very poor financial planning to use savings to fund ongoing operational deficits. The savings would only last a few years, then we would be in the same situation, but without any cushion at all. Delaying recognition of the crisis is not the best approach. We do not know enough about Wachusett budget to offer insight into where and how you need to make reductions. That is your role. But we do know that you need to do so, and you need to prepare to seek an override next year if the increase is anywhere near where it has been for the past decade. Holden cannot absorb these increases anymore. The Holden Finance Committee will be recommending that our town meeting vote no on the WRSD budget request. I know you're receiving similar messages from other communities. Please hear the message and start making structural changes to your budget so that they can be supported. Thank you, Holden Finance Committee, Paul Challenger, Chair. All right, let me just check my email to see if there are any other things that arrived. All right, seeing none, the next item on our agenda is the discussion of the evening. So the purpose for us being here is that the House Ways and Means budget came out, I want to say last week, although time is kind of in a vacuum right now. And as such, there were a few important changes that the administration really has to make. Concomitant with that, there's other changes to the budget that the administration wants to recommend. And Dan has a PowerPoint that he wants to present to highlight the top level of those changes, which he sent to us today by email. And so we'll have a discussion about what we think of those things, and then we'll see if we're in a place or not to vote on making a recommendation to the full committee on Monday. So Dan, do you want to take the stage, and then we can?
Yep.
Maybe you can go through your presentation, the PowerPoint part at least, and then we can ask questions.
Sure thing.
After that.
Alrighty, just a quick sound check and site check that you see the full screen here. Business and Finance Subcommittee meeting, April 26, 2021, FY2 budget update. You're all good with that? All right, great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So as Ken said, we're here this evening to update you on the FY22 Wachusett budget. There have been several changes with the release of the House Ways and Means budget just prior to the break, April 14th, 2021. So I'm going to walk you through those changes. And again, as I'm presenting, I can't see you. So Ken, feel free. If someone has a question, I'm happy to stop in that particular slide. All right, as I said a moment ago, the House budget was released on April 14th, 2021. Some of the key points that do impact Wachusett. Number one, the use of ESSER 2 funds, which we did use in our initial draft budget to reduce the increase of MLC for member towns, has been nixed. The value that was associated with this in the Wachusett approved budget for March 15 was approximately $335,461. Secondly, we've also learned through discussions with our representative at Mars that the Senate, when it releases its budget, is unlikely to make any changes to what the House had recommended. Consequently, we will need to recalculate the assessments, if no other reason, just based upon this one change. But there are others. On the revenue side, per the House budget, Chapter 70 remained unchanged. Regional transportation, we saw an increase of almost $190,000, $188,987. Charter school reimbursement, though, went down $40,372. And school choice, as of now, remained unchanged. Excuse me, with the House budget. On the expense side, the charter school assessments, they were reduced $25,251. On the local revenues, as administration looked at the revised figures and looked at the bigger picture, we use an additional $200,000 from excess and deficiency. So the new figure that you saw in the work that I sent them over the weekend is now $950,000 from excess and deficiency. In terms of the FY22 assessments, again, I gave you a couple of scenarios, both Friday afternoon, Friday evening, late, and then this afternoon, whereby the general fund appropriation remained the same. We just reallocated funds. And then a second scenario that you saw this afternoon is that administration made cuts of approximately $500,000 and also recalculated the assessments. So what's changed with FY22 since March 15th, 2021, when the school committee, the full committee voted our budget? As I said a moment ago, a portion of ESSER 2 funds are now being reduced, are now being used to reduce expenses in FY21 and in FY22. The ESSER 2 grant is approximately $617,702. There is a portion of ESSER 3 funds, and we're still waiting on that. We have a tentative figure, approximately 1.3 million, that will be used to potentially reduce expenditures also in FY22. We also recently received the state coronavirus grant. This grant has a value of almost $246,000, $245,950. And this grant runs through June 30th, 2021. However, I do want to point out that most of the grants, most of the funds have been, in essence, spent. And in just the past week, where we're getting closer to receiving FEMA reimbursement, as I reported several times, of the $129,000 that we submitted, $112,360 is coming our way. I signed off on a great deal of paperwork last week, and there's a bit more to do, but we're getting closer. And again, if this arrives before June 30, great. If not, we'll have it for July 1. And just as an aside there, I've recommended to Superintendent McCall that we set up a special revenue fund called FEMA fund when these dollars do arrive, and again, they could be used for any FEMA related expenditure, either on the salary or on the expense side. So next steps. So what do we need to do, or what can we do to reduce our budget? In both the state coronavirus grant and the ESSER 2 grants, there's approximately $100,000 that has been allocated for PPE. In the ESSER 3 grant that we're working on, we're looking to allocate another $100,000 for PPE. It is our recommendation then, as the committee knows, that there is approximately $200,000 in the FY22 budget, and that we would cut that from the FY22 budget because of these other grant opportunities. Also in ESSER 2, there's approximately $50,000 in textbooks. It is our recommendation that we reduce the appropriation, the balance in the FY2 general fund by $50,000 in the textbook line, given the availability of grant funds. In ESSER 3, again, Deputy Superintendent Berlow is working on that grant as we speak, but we'd be looking to allocate just under $138,000 to building subs, $137,640. And again, building subs, these could be day-to-day subs, these could be long-term subs, these could be a continuation of the 20 or so subs that we hired in FY21 to address the sub challenge in the buildings this year. Again, that being the case, we would look to reduce the general fund in salaries and stipends by approximately $137,640. I also want to point out too that in speaking with Deputy Superintendent Berlow, he told me that when he does write the grant, he will most likely write in the grant approximately $150,000 for that particular line item. In FEMA, and as I said a moment ago, we are getting close to realizing those dollars. I actually spoke with our FEMA rep last Thursday afternoon, and so we have again the ability that once these dollars arrive, we can use it in one of two ways. They could certainly just deposit the funds into miscellaneous revenue should they arrive prior to June 30. Or, as I said a moment ago, set up a special revenue fund, call it the FEMA fund, and then that gives us flexibility to address some COVID-related costs in FY22. So the question becomes, where do we allocate the 112,000 and change in the 22 budget. It could go either in salaries or operations and maintenance, and by that it means what do we cut? And again, it'd be in one or both of those appropriations. So, a quick snapshot. Again, we'd be looking to reduce $137,640 from salaries and stipends, $312,360 from operations and maintenance appropriation. And again, that's a combination of really two numbers: the 200,000 plus the 112 and change. And then last, to make a cut from instructional support of approximately $50,000 for a total of $500,000 in proposed cuts for FY22. Next steps to move this forward. Obviously, we're here this evening to talk about this proposal. Secondly, that we're bringing forward to the full committee on May 5th, and that they would vote the revised town assessments as well as the revised general fund appropriation. And then again, because warrants for town meetings have long been settled, or soon to be settled, that we would coordinate with key personnel to bring forward these recommended changes on town meeting floor to amend the budget to reflect these proposed changes here. Thank you.
All right, so thanks, Dan. And you know, as Dan says, that any change to the appropriation and change to the overall final budget line has to be voted on by school committee, in addition to 4 of the 5 towns, right? Just give some history too. There has been time past where the budget has been changed at town meeting floor, but not by us. And we can always go back and adopt that budget, right, at a later vote of the school committee. But at some point, both bodies have to vote on this change, right? Both school committee and the towns. So that's where we are. So our goal for the next however long is to discuss this document. Questions, of course, there is backing material that Dan provided that gives some of the numbers behind those changes and those new assessments. So open the floor to questions. And actually, whoever is on the phone, the 508 unmarked number, could you identify yourself just for so we can have you in the minutes?
Ken, it's Chris Lucchesi. I was having trouble getting in via the video link.
Oh, hi, Chris. How are you? I did read Paul's statement. If no one objects to taking him out of order, to give Chris if he has anything he wished to add to the public hearing.
So I was not going to add much more than what Mr. Challenger shared with you from the Finance Committee perspective. Whatever action, if any action is taken tonight, I'm sure it would be welcomed. We would love all the information you can share with us so that we understand how you arrived at the new number. And, we look forward to working with you on trying to find a way to come up with a sustainable plan to fund education in our district. That's all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chris. And Chris Lucchesi is from Holden, is a member of our Finance Committee for Jeff, who is taking the minutes.
Yes, my apologies. I should have noted that.
All right, and if you wouldn't mind muting Chris when you're not speaking, just because sometimes we get feedback in the meeting. All right, so the floor is open to those who wish to speak.
I have a couple of just clarifying questions about things that were in the report we got today. But I didn't want to interrupt in case he covered them. Just to understand where we are. I understand why some of the changes are being made, but a couple of things that were included in the report involved charging things to grants. I know the new COVID grant you said is already spent in one of the documents, not 3, the second, the state COVID grants. Sorry, not the ESSER grant. This new state funds that have to be spent by June, I think somewhere in the documents it said was basically already spent, and I
June
wasn't
30.
clear
Yes.
what those were being spent on, because I didn't see that reflected in the other information you gave us.
So I'd be happy to provide that level of detail. Again, part of that, Malaya, is a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It includes building subs. It also includes PPE and some HVAC work as well. A lot of that, and I may have, I apologize, I'm reaching for a piece of paper over here. So there is a 100,000 that we allocated in that grant. Basically, we'll be doing some journal entries. About 90,000 for PPE. As the committee probably knows, we've been purchasing a lot of desks for the high school and other buildings, and that value is approximately 56,000, 55,950, the exact figure. So I'm happy to provide a detailed follow-up, at our next meeting.
I was curious in part because looking at the big picture, those are in the current fiscal year. So
Right.
would those impact the amount of funds we have to carry over, because we've already very carefully planned out that money? So I was just trying to get a handle on if this is another, I forget how much it was, a significant amount of money. I just didn't know if that was additional funds that we're not going to then have in this year's budget. Well, we're spending them, but we've already accounted for them in some way in planning what we're carrying forward. So if we're now being able to charge some of those things to a new grant, is that an additional adjustment we can make in looking at the big picture?
So looking at the big picture, Malaya, what those charges will do, the approximately 245,000, is that will help with our bottom line in FY21, because these charges have to be fully expended by June 30 of 2021.
Okay, I'll keep simmering, because that was my understanding. But my real question is, does that then free up $245,000 more dollars that we had not planned to carry forward in some way into FY22 that we could do that with now?
It does free up cash this year, and if we don't reallocate it, that would fall to our bottom line.
Okay, I will listen some more before I ask part 2 of that question. So thank you.
I have a few questions, but I was letting other people talk. Just quickly, for the special revenue fund, is that something that requires a vote of the school committee to establish that fund like we had to with the regional transportation?
So I'm going to check on DOR regulations, Ken, and if it is the case, I will speak to Daryl, and I would have it on the agenda either for May 5th, if at all possible. I think we've got plenty of time to get it on the agenda, if not for the next meeting. Again, I have another pile of paper, so to speak, probably not the right term, but a great deal of paper still to sign off with FEMA. And it's actually due to them by May 7th. So again, I'm not expecting this cast to show up much before June 30, in all honesty. But I will definitely confirm that.
I'll hold my other questions for Carl. Do you raise your hand?
So a question on what you had said about with the ESSER 2 funds not being able to use to slot those against an MLC increase. Was that like, did that apply to all of how we partition out our budget? Because as you know, we're like 16.7 million above MLC for our towns, because we've got the operational piece. Transportation's smaller, but we're more than that number above MLC. And so is the prohibition against using that to offset the operational assessment as well? No.
When those dollars were first presented several months ago, the guidance from DESE at that time is that these funds could be used, keywords could be, to reduce the increase in MLC for member towns. The Dr. McCall had received several inquiries. One was in writing, and the other, I believe, were verbal from the towns to take a portion of that to reduce their increase. And of the 5 towns, Holden's amount at that time was approximately $207,000 that was used to reduce the increase. But that's the only area where those funds were, at least with the House budget now, are no longer available to be used.
Well, I guess to clarify, but again, like you look at Holden, there's the MLC part of their budget, there's the operational part of their budget, there's the transportation part of their budget, there's the debt service part of their budget. All 4 of those tie into their assessment. You had specifically said that it can't be used for the MLC line. Could it be used for any of the other 3 lines in the town's assessment?
No.
It can't, Carl, but indirectly. Let me give my understanding of this. So looking at Dan's numbers, when he raised the MLC back to what it's supposed to be. Now, most surrounding towns didn't actually apply SR2 in their original budgets. We did because of the requests of the towns. He reduced the operational by approximately the same amount. If this is he's accounting for that by reducing the operational, because now we will use the SR2 funds, right, instead of the towns. Therefore, we have less need for money from the towns from the operational line. So really, while it's not technically shifting it from one to the other, it is operationally. Now, where it's tricky, and we had this conversation offline, Dan and Daryl and I did, is that the way that is distributed between the towns is different, right? Because the only towns that had received their potential relief for SR2 were ones that had received an increase in their MLC, but not all of our towns had actually received an increase in the MLC. So there was nothing to use it against. So when that saving gets redistributed to the operational, which is just based on population, right, or student population, it actually, the amount down and the amount up per town isn't always consistent, right? So Holden's basically a 1-to-1 swap. Some of the other towns maybe have reduced a little bit more because they didn't receive the ESSER funds in the first place. But at the end of the day, this is the way it really should have been distributed to begin with. We were just responding to the town's requests, and then when the House says we can't do that, Dan is making the appropriate changes to the budget before we talk about any reductions or more E&D on top of that. Is that a fair assessment,
Yes.
Dan?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
And then just different topic, but just to make sure that I had kind of understood. So kind of in slide 10, when you talked about proposed cuts to the budget, this $500,000, do I understand this right, that we're not reducing what we spend by 500,000, we're basically adding in we're basically using these grants as revenue. So we're reducing, kind of the impact would be to reduce assessments, but when I hear a cut to a budget, that makes me think of a reduction in spending, which I don't necessarily. I'm confused on that. Is it cutting $500,000 from our spending, or is it reducing assessments?
It's actually a little bit of both, because we aren't reducing the spending, but we are reducing the budget, because the budget line doesn't include grant spending, so it's not being treated as local revenue, which would be part of the budget. It's being charged to a grant. So my impression is we're spending the same amount of money, but you will see a reduction in the budget because grant spending isn't part of our general fund budget.
That's correct, Ken. So right now, the budget that was approved on March 15th was $105,053,279. with these proposed cuts of $500,000. We are looking to reduce the general fund appropriation by that value, but only because that $500,000 in expenditures has been reallocated elsewhere, and that elsewhere is in a combination of a state grant or several federal grants or a federal reimbursement. So if these proposed cuts hold, our revised general fund appropriation would be $104,553,279, and that's in essence a 2.4 million increase from between 21 and now April 26th. And that amounts to a 2.39% increase between 21 and 22, again, as of April 26th.
The question I was going to ask before I turn the floor back to Carl, but I think it's leading now. So if you don't mind, Carl, I want to follow on it. Is that if we're taking $500,000 out of the budget and we're using one-time funds to pay for it, it strikes me that the only money I'd want to do that for are one-time expenses, because otherwise the same thing that Mr. Challenger mentioned in his letter, we're kind of doing to ourselves. My impression from what you said was that it seems like that is the case, that we're talking about PPE, we're talking about a textbook line, maybe that 50,000 isn't completely, a little bit of a deficit, and we're talking about building subs which are addressing pandemic-related challenges to staffing. So is it fair to say that at least, except for maybe that 50,000 in textbooks, that this money is hopefully one-time expenses that we're spending with these grants?
It is, Ken, and you know, again, as the committee knows, you know, one of the big increases in operations and maintenance, for example, is that we put in $200,000 in the FY22 budget for, in essence, PPE. We're able to reduce that because of all these other grants. That's $200,000 right away. Boom. Then the FEMA, again, we can move the FEMA into a special revenue fund, and we can hold on to that. We don't need to touch that for FY22. We can bring that forward into FY23 and thereafter. We would probably need to expend it because of how we set it up. Probably by 23 or 24. It would be my recommendation that we align the expenditures of those dollars with probably ESSER 3, because ESSER 3 is a multi-year grant, and that gets us, I believe ESSER 3 goes through FY24. So that's number two. And then looking at you know, the salaries, again, the 137,000 and change, as the committee knows, and as we've talked about, as I think as Darryl has said in full school committee meetings, we hired this year approximately 20 building subs because we had a tough time getting bodies, and so that would be reflective of, in essence, a lot of those costs, and then. To a lesser degree, yes, the 50,000 that would be a hit to textbooks, and I know that Deputy Superintendent Burlow has worked real hard to get that number up. But it's and I am in no means making light of this. I'm not, but it's 50,000, which I think that we can recover, and not say 500,000. Or something like that. And I think that 50,000 is certainly recoverable in FY23. I think Darryl, you want to?
Yeah, Dan, that's a good summary of that. And Ken, you're right on target with what you just spoke about. And you know, in reference to that $50,000, remember the textbook line covers many different things. It's not just textbooks. It's, you know, some tech. We have purchased so much tech this year. You know, we're ahead of the game right now. So, you know, part of it could even be, okay, we might not need to buy, you know, these extra Chromebooks or whatever it is that we are able to buy with, you know, money that we're still getting from the government. So we still haven't, because we don't have the grant yet, the ESSER 3 grant, we still haven't made specific allocations for spending that out either.
I'd also I'm sorry, Kid. I'd also like to point out that we are looking to hold on all of our school choice into FY22. Things may happen next year, and we may fully expend it. But we are also looking to bring forward a goodly amount in circuit breaker, as we've discussed. I'd make the argument that it is administration's charge to itself to move forward that carry forward of circuit breaker over the next several years. Again, to have my term, a special education rainy day fund, and that's what we have in circuit breaker. And certainly, if we had to drill down between school choice and circuit breaker, we could certainly find the cash to come up with $50K for that cut. Certainly, there's instructional technologies, as Darryl said. Many of the other items in textbooks that are not currently allocated to SPED and perhaps maybe should be allocated to SPED, in terms of maintenance of effort. So I believe that the circuit breaker is another area that we could certainly pull from for those costs if need be.
And just to clarify, we're not actually spending $50,000 less in textbooks next year. What we're talking about is the fact that we're reducing the budget. So for the following year, we're going from a lower beginning point. Is what this discussion of a reduction is about. Well, yes. You had a follow-up question, right?
Thank you.
Well, I had a comment about the idea of using the ESSER funds toward one-time expenses, and it actually goes back to something mentioned in our last meeting, I believe, when we had a detailed accounting. I think it was ESSER 2, but it might have been ESSER 3. I honestly can't remember. But there were two charges. There were two $50,000 charges that were for things that originally were in our original budget. So since we were talking, I wanted to bring those up because if we're talking about one-time expenses, I wanted to make sure that was reflected. There was a charge for the deep consulting, $50,000, and there was a $50,000 charge for the interface program, which is the mental health, which I know is related to COVID, but it was in our original budget when we passed it in March, and not charged to a grant. And then at our last meeting, it was listed under something that you were planning to charge to a grant or already had. I forget which one. So I just wanted to clarify, if we're talking about 50,000 here and 50,000 here and 50,000 here, now that's $150,000 of potentially not one-time expenses. So I wanted to reflect that and I just asked the question if we're trying to sort this all out.
So the 50,000 for the deep consulting, that is now off the table. I'm not saying that particular need is off the table, but that was a multi-year proposal, 5-year proposal, and speaking with Darryl and Deputy Superintendent Berlow, where we're nixing that particular contract with them and looking to revisit that.
Right. But we're not so we're not nixing the contract, but what we are doing is we're going back and we're working with Deep around because the contract was much pricier than what we had originally thought we would be spending. So we're coming back to it, but it's still,
that's fine. I didn't want to. I don't need to revisit that whole thing. That's the other subcommittee I'm on. But I just wanted to clarify the budget factor because it was mentioned the last time. And the other thing was the interface that you had also said was charged toward one of the ESSER grants, which is an ongoing expense. I think we've had it 3 years now, and I don't think it's going anywhere. So I wanted to clarify that as well because that was on the ESSER list that we saw at our last meeting.
That is correct, and that's typically an expense that we would have charged to school choice in the past if necessary, and then during the year, depending upon the availability of funds, done a journal entry and backed it out of school choice into the general fund.
Thank you for clarifying. So then I will go back to my. Oh no, I can wait because I interrupted with that. So my other question can wait.
Carl, I interrupted you originally or followed on your comment. Were you done or do you have other questions?
I think I'm done for now. I think they kind of covered it. So go for it.
Jeff, do you have any comments or questions?
Not at this moment, but I think I will. I enjoy. I do have a lot of questions, but you guys are asking them, and I want to make sure I can kind of articulate them, if you will.
Yeah, so I think if we move forward with this, Dan, I'm happy to step in and add some things like I did tonight at the main meeting. I do think getting in front of the explanation of the fact that the MLC change didn't apply to all the towns equally is something that I think we want to be clear with the committee when we go to them, because some towns didn't get the relief in the first place because they didn't have an increase in their MLC. So I think that might be just something to consider adding to your PowerPoint, just to not to cut off questions so you want to have a discussion, but just to pre-explain that so people can ask maybe more directed questions about it. But otherwise, I thought it was pretty clear the way you all came forward with this. So I guess a couple of people said they were going to wait on their questions, but I at this point, I guess the question is, I'll ask for a motion in a moment and we can have more conversations then, but the motion would be to recommend to the full school committee changes in the assessment and the general fund budget as described by administration in the call to meeting. So we'll make that if someone wants to make that motion and second it, we can continue discussing it. Unless we want to have conversations about not voting on that.
Well, I have a logistical question, because when I read the information, I saw there were two different paths, and I'm not sure if we're talking about them with the assumption that we would both adjust it based on the House Ways and Means numbers and the $500,000 reduction as well, or if we're considering the two things separately. And then there's the matter of using extra E&D that would we not have to do that separately as well?
So go ahead.
I guess logistically, I'm just, if we do it all as one motion, as you just phrased it, that includes several other pieces. So I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page.
The way I worded the ask for a motion, and I can't make a motion as the chair, so there's no motion on the floor, it was to just include all three of those pieces. If that's why I was saying before we make that motion, if we want to discuss more process, we can do that. Logistically at the full committee, it's up to Mike, but if we vote on the budget and the appropriation, we're essentially voting on the E&D as well, because when we set the budget, that's just part of the thing. People could always amend the motion on the floor to pull that out if they wanted to, or to put back in certain amounts of money. I think what would be helpful is for this committee to make a recommendation, whatever that recommendation is, to the full committee. I mean, we're just 4 voices on the full board, but ideally, I would like us to leave a meeting tonight or a meeting on Thursday. And to be honest, I'd like us to leave a meeting tonight, making some recommendation to the full committee about what we think. And if we want to talk about those 3 pieces separately, we could do that before we make a motion so that we make the appropriate motion.
Yeah. My questions kind of dig more into some of those details, so I can. So
why don't you ask him?
Well, one of them is really, I keep going back to this, I'm still thinking about this $254,000, almost $246,000 almost of this new grant, and that hasn't been reflected in any adjustments to the budget. I don't know if there's a reason for that, but when we're looking at literally every penny, $250,000 or $246,000 seems like an amount we should maybe be considering in those numbers. And when we're considering taking more out of E&D, when we had a very lengthy discussion about how low our E&D is, and we made that decision intentionally, I don't know. I'm trying to balance all these pieces in my head. It seems like we have this $245,000 of new money coming into our budget this year, in this current fiscal year, that we haven't factored into. Is that more money we can carry over? Is that more money we don't have to take out of somewhere else? I didn't see that reflected in these pieces, so I wanted to kind of hear your thoughts on that, or if you're saving it and just not doing that for a specific reason. If there's some uncertainty we don't know about.
What I heard, and tell me if I'm wrong, Dan, is I heard that this would drop to the bottom line. So I'm assuming this is replacing the money we're spending out of E&D, but at least that's the way I was interpreting it, but I could be interpreting that wrong.
So that's correct, Ken. It can certainly fall to the bottom line, or with the savings in general fund, we could allocate someplace else. At this point, and again, this is a grant that is fairly recent, and we're just looking now, and Deputy Burlow, just so that the committee knows, we received a payment of $125,000 without having set up the grant. The money showed up, which is a wonderful thing. So we're, I guess to use the proverbial, we're kind of building the plane as we fly, and we're allocating cost. To use an analogy, but I think it's a good analogy. 125,000 showed up, though we were forewarned that it was coming. Boom, it showed up. There was no grant application. There was no grant application. And so we're kind of writing the grant application, if you will, as we look to spend down these dollars. And again, the clock is ticking, if you will, only because the period for the grant was this past July through June 30. So we're either making journal entries or we're charging, like for example, these day-to-day building subs to that line. To that grant, as an example.
Well, that makes sense to me. If it's generally essentially replacing the E&D, that makes sense. It's a little bit more than what we're taking out, but that makes sense if that's the plan. I just wanted to know what the plan was. Thank you.
And I think clarity in that will be important, whether I'm interpreting this correctly or not, because there was concern amongst committee members about how much we were taking from E&D. We're proposing more. So I think some accounting for how you anticipate money falling to the bottom line to keep us at our 1% threshold, at least, would be important. I respect the fact that some of that we can't really talk about, and I don't actually know. I'm not like saying I know, and I'm not saying I don't know either, in terms of what we're anticipating falling to the bottom line after we have settlements with transportation companies. But I do think addressing why you think it's appropriate to put 200,000 more out of E&D than you did before, when some members in the committee had some concern about the number that was in there before, is something you probably want to give another line or two of detail about, if not now, before it goes to the full committee.
So Ken, we administration certainly looked at that back in early mid-March, and we looked at a couple of different scenarios in terms of E&D at that time, and the scenarios were range from $750 to almost $1 million, certainly there's been a lot of grant activity that has happened since that time. There's been a lot of things that have happened since that time, we're also being incredibly sensitive to what we've heard from the towns to make this work. So we've tapped further into our rainy day fund, if you will, to reduce the numbers. I mean, I'm just looking at Holden, for example, and I did share this today with Chair Challenger. If these numbers hold, the $500,000 reduction that we've been talking about, Holden's increase between 21 and today, April 26th, would be approximately 1.3 million, their increase on March 15th was 1.6, almost 1.7. It was 1,682 and change. So there's a savings there of almost $360,000 for Holden alone.
Yeah, that would be helpful, I think. And I mentioned this to you in an email, but if there is a way, if we make this recommendation, to include those two spreadsheet sets of data with the $500,000 reduction and without it in the same spreadsheet, I think that would make it also transparent and easier for people to follow. Like the example you just gave about, March versus
So in the
know?
packet that you received Friday afternoon, there were
Yeah.
two columns. One was,
Yeah, no, we saw that, but then with today's budget, which also includes the $500,000 reduction, I think having all of that on one spreadsheet would be useful in illustrating the differences we're talking about and why.
And I would second that. However, I would say that I would recommend that our body make a recommendation, an administration recommendation, because in past years where we've gotten into the choice A or choice B, that way of framing a discussion at the full committee is challenging. I think having the information is important. I'm not disagreeing. But I think we should come, and administration come up with a recommendation, and then if people want to change it, they can, of course, disagree with it. So how then shall we proceed is my question. You know, my original suggestion was a motion to accept their recommendation as they sent it to us today, which is including the changes that are basically just moving money around. It doesn't hit each town the same, but moving money around from the ESSER 2 and the 500,000 and the E&D. That is the intention of the motion I'm asking for, but I'm just asking for a motion. I'm not making it. People can make a different one, or they can not.
Just to restate what you'd already said, Ken, if I could jump in. And all we're doing in this motion, and if it were to be approved, is just moving this to the general school committee for further discussion. Okay.
Well, we're making a recommendation that the school committee say yes to it is what we're doing. There's if we don't want to make that recommendation, we really don't have to make we don't have to take a vote at all. The commission can present whatever they want to the school committee, but the motion I'm suggesting is we recommend it to the committee. So we're saying consider it, and we suggest you vote for it.
Okay.
If people want to make that motion. Carl.
So I have a question, and part of this comes from kind of one of my other hats, though. I mean, as a resident of Paxton. So can you explain really clearly, I guess, why Paxton saw the largest percent increase of the 5 towns?
so Kyle, is that looking at the?
So real specific, talking operational, before any changes, Paxton's operational jumped by 20%. No other town had a 20% increase in operational. So I'm asking why, what were the mechanics behind causing Paxton's operational assessment to jump a larger percent than all the other towns?
So the operational assessment is, by definition, the final calculation that we run. You know, first debt is run by the percentages of students, and the same as well for transportation. MLC is a number straight out of the gate. We have no control over that figure at all.
And I understand that. I'm asking about the ones that you specifically have control over. How was it that Paxton ended up with a greater percent increase than the other 4 towns?
So that operational assessment is basically the last number, as I said. It is an optional number that they could or don't have to pay, and that is driven by the balance to bring the to tie in the numbers to the general fund appropriation. I'd have to, and I will, drill down further into some of the particular challenges for Paxton, and certainly I would have that information are available for next Wednesday evening.
Daryl, do you know, and not to put you on the spot, but do you know, or Dana, do you know, did Paxton's share of the town, of the student population change in any significant way?
You know what? We haven't.
It's probably in the budget book, right?
I know we have it in we put it in the presentation.
Because that's really the only way their operational
Right.
share would have changed more than other towns.
And that was my suspicion, which then leads me to this. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, as a district, we have been advocating to the state to not use last year's enrollment numbers because of the adverse effect on our district. Why haven't we taken that approach when it comes to our town's assessments?
Not sure that's our responsibility, Carl.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, so we have to advocate on behalf of, using last year's numbers to get, ultimately more money in terms of Chapter 70, which was what we did, which is what most districts did. And then the state decided to say, okay, we kind of hear what you're saying. So we're going to put aside this $40 million kind of pothole fund that they're going to try to figure out how to distribute. And they've not figured that out yet. I spoke to Rob Curtin about that a couple weeks ago, and they still don't have an idea. I am meeting with the commissioner tomorrow, so we might have more information on that. But, again, that wouldn't be us, advocating on behalf of the towns to do that.
No, my point is that as a organization, we are saying we don't want the October 1st numbers being used because they don't reflect our district accurately. And then we're turning around and using those October 1 numbers to characterize how we're distributing funds. So on the surface, it doesn't.
I know, but we have to use we have to use them. Those are the numbers that we have to use to do the calculations. I know what you're saying. I don't not disagree with you. But the reality is that those are the numbers that the state's saying we need to utilize in terms of defining the amount.
Well, I understand that for MLC, but I don't necessarily know if MGL specifies how a district divvies out its operational piece.
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure, Carl, for MGL.
And again, the other assessments, Kyle, are driven by the October 1 count.
And of course, smaller changes in student populations in Paxton are unfortunately going to make bigger swings in their percentage increases because small numbers and a smaller number of changes. Unfortunately, I was looking at the regional agreement to see if it was spelled out there.
I had another thing that may make a small difference from my research for Holden and overall, and I don't have Paxton in front of me, but I remember. Even though we're hold harmless and we technically didn't lose funds according to the state because we had the minimum per pupil, that actually ended up costing us money on the local side because it's complicated. If I look, I can't explain it very well, but we actually had to spend more overall than we did last year according to the state formula. I think it's like 102% net school spending versus 100% over what we did last year, and that 2% is like I know it's like $300,000 for Holden. I don't know how it is for the other towns. It's a very small amount, but it adds up. All these like $200,000 here and $300,000 here, they all add up. And I know when I did research on Holden, that was one thing that was surprising to me. It's a consequence of the formula that they use, that because of how all that works out, we're actually spending more total, which comes down on the local side as well. And it's just a tiny fraction, but it's definitely a factor versus what would happen if they were using different numbers and we weren't hold harmless because they gave us extra. Basically, we're spending more. And it's not a lot, but it's probably worth, I mean, I don't have the chart in front of me, but when I did the research, it falls to the towns that have the higher percentage. The two smaller towns won't see any difference in that at all. Very minimal, but the several that have the larger percentages absolutely do.
The prior year's October 1 count is actually in the regional agreement as well. I was looking this up. So So we couldn't change that without changing the regional agreement, or I suspect the other 4 towns would have a concern.
Dan, have you heard, you just said you have no idea what they're doing with the $40 million or whatever they add to it, because I've heard rumblings of adding more to it even, which who knows how that will end up.
I've heard those same rumblings.
We don't really know though. Do we have thoughts or a strategy for what we might do when they do figure that out? Or do we have sort of a priority list of how that would affect our funding, or what we would do at that point if we have extra funds that we receive in October or November, and how we would adjust that with the towns or not? I guess I wanted to figure out what our thoughts are on that as well.
So I'll just jump in quickly, Daryl. Certainly, we can we don't need to change the total budget amount, but we could certainly change how we allocate the cost. Again, that 40 million is not factored into this equation here. Hopefully that'll be seen in the Senate. Maybe not. Maybe it comes down to the compromise committee in June or thereabouts. That's number one. Number two, and again, if this were pushed off to the fall, depending upon where we land at the end of this year, and again, we've been doing projections at every meeting in terms of that number. Maybe it means we can reduce what we take out of E&D a little bit. I mean, again, we're very sensitive to what we're charging the towns, and I'm just looking at Holden because it's the first one in front of me here. A 1.3 increase as opposed to almost 1.7 increase, and again, it's repetitive, all the way down here in terms of the increases with the towns. Again, go ahead, Darryl.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, Malaya, I think that $40 million from the conversations that we've had at the superintendent level, at the state level, it's really been one of no one is exactly sure what it might look like, how it's divvied up. It might be like the pothole money that's divvied up, depending upon need by district. I mean, it could be a boon for some districts. It could be a bust. So, but pretty much every district lost kids last year. So it would almost be like every district would have access to that $40 million.
Yeah, I don't think we can count on it. I was just thinking through if that might impact things in the long run.
It could. It could.
It probably won't, though. They didn't do what they really needed to do to be helpful. That's my personal opinion. So I won't. I won't speak for all of us. But I'm frustrated by the $40 million versus just using different numbers. Even if they had adjusted the number somewhere in the middle, it would have been much more helpful and predictable for all of us. But we can't deal with that. We can only deal with what's in front of us.
And, given that we are a district that is a large regional district, but, look 45 minutes to the east and look, 5 minutes to the south, and you're going to see districts are going to consume a lot of their share of that $40 million. So we shouldn't be thinking, oh, what 10% of 40 million are we getting? We were talking about what fraction of percent that's going to be. If it cracked $100,000, I'd be surprised.
Yeah.
So it will be a good problem to have, but I don't think it's going to be a transformative problem or opportunity.
And again, we brought this forth and Dan and I have been talking about this for a while. We've heard the towns. We have come again. The grant funding that has come our way has allowed us to play around with the budget so that we're able to move some costs around, lower the overall budget, try to make it a little more palatable to some of the communities. I know Carl Paxton is. I talked to Pete Bogren today, just about the budget. They're having a FinCom select board meeting, I think, this evening. So Holden is as well. They're having a FinCom meeting. But you know, again, we're trying to do what we can. I think the overall increase now, Dan, is 2.38% or something, 2.33. I don't have it right in front of me, but that's a pretty low increase overall. And again, I think part of it is so many of the funds that we typically get from the state have to go back to the towns this year. And I think that's frustrating for everybody. So we're doing everything in our power to offset, you know, as much as we can, while also retaining. And Paul Challenger made that point in his letter that he read today, or that he shared with Chair Mills on this. When we were talking about savings, we're a district that every year, for the most part, we just get by. We don't have a lot in excess and deficiency. You know, we have enough, but we don't have easy access to excess and deficiency. We don't have a true savings account. So Dan's been, you know, on me about this since he came on board. He's like, Daryl, we need some savings. We need something, a rainy day fund, whatever it is. Towns have those funds. We don't. And that's something that we're trying to establish during this time, so that we're able to, okay, hey, if we have an out of district placement that we have to deal with, we have the funds that we can, you know, take and support that. You know, we're not going back to the town saying, hey, you know, we're gonna have to tap into E&D to fix something, or to take care of a student that needs to go out of district. So we run close to the margins every single year. You know, this year, because of the grant funding that's come in, it's allowed us to be a little more flexible now toward the end of the year, so we can do the chargeback, so that we can, you know, lower that overall dollar amount for next year.
So just a couple things on that. Number one, if we go forward with the $500,000 reduction to the general fund, you know, that's the new number would be a 2.4 million increase over the previous year, this year. And the percentage change is 2.39%. And the other thing too, I need to stress without equivocation, is that these changes that we've brought forward is the end result of these grants, and we are in a much better position now in the past week or so in terms of the numbers in terms of these grants than we were at or about March 15th or prior to that. You know, the 245, you know, we hadn't seen that yet. We knew it was out there. Number one, we have much clearer information on ESSER 2. We've got better information on FEMA. I've been talking about FEMA, as you all know, since last September or thereabouts, and we're getting better information on ESSER 3, all of which we didn't have prior to March 15th. Ken, my report that I sent out the other day, I think this presentation and this discussion pretty much, I think, covers the report that I sent out the other day. I mean, for the committee, you know, one thing I didn't put up on the screen, but you have it in the report from Friday, is I've got a tracking sheet of the state budget process, so you can see the differences between the governor's budget and the House budget, and I'll continue to update that as we go forward with the Senate and then the Compromise Committee. But I think in terms of the executive summary, a lot of what was in the executive summary was also in the PowerPoint, except there was more current information tonight in the PowerPoint.
It strikes me as unlikely that the Senate will change. I mean, I suspect that there's been lots of conversations already behind the scenes between the House and the Senate, given the process this year and last year. That wouldn't have necessarily been the case 3 years ago. So I'll come back to the committee and say, if folks want to make a motion to recommend something, I think that it generally helps the committee's function to have a recommendation from a subcommittee. If we don't feel that we are ready to do that, I mean, it's fine. We can discuss it on Monday.
Thursday, you mean?
I really meant Monday, because I don't know what else we're going to have any, unless you're going to give us new information on Thursday. I think we either make a recommendation now or we don't, unless people feel like, that, I don't know.
I guess, Ken, do members need more information? Like, Malaya, Jeff, Carl.
I don't need detail about the $245,000. I just would like to know where it's going, which you answered. So I'm not. I think it makes sense when you bring all the pieces together, but I'm not happy. I know I'm concerned that we're going to still be having these conversations on Monday and then next week, because I just don't. It factors beyond us, because it's still not going down as much as the towns would like it to, and I really don't think there's anything else we can do to change that. So I think it's these changes moving in the right direction, but I think we're going to be having this discussion in 2 weeks, whenever Holden's election is over, whenever May 10th is over, because or whenever it is, the week after that, I guess. And that's frustrating, and it's not anyone's fault. It just is the way the budget is right now. And I mean, in the last set of reductions before this, Holden's actually went up like 0.1%, even though we cut like $1 million out of the budget. It's just the way the formula worked, and there's nothing we can do about that. So I think that's why I'm not jumping up to endorse anything, because I don't think it's going to solve the bigger problem. But I think it's moving in the right direction. Yeah, so that's where my head is.
In terms of process, we need 15 votes, right, from the school committee to change the budget and the assessments. If it goes to town meeting and doesn't pass for the 5 towns, or we know it's not going to pass for the 5 towns, we are obligated to come back with a lower budget, right, at that point. If we start into the next fiscal year without an approved budget, we would be in a 1/12 budget, which is not something to be desiring, right? Because that does limit our expenses. It's probably not a huge problem in July and August, except for hiring, and buying books and that kind of thing, and make sure they arrive in time. But we do have to, if we as a committee take a vote on Monday, it has to be something that 15 people can get behind, right? And I guess my question is, I think that this threads the balance a little between people who on Monday night would say, why are we cutting anything before we even go to the towns and get their input? Although we have from town leaders, we haven't gotten it from the voting public. Versus those who might say, why aren't we cutting more? I mean, to answer your question, how can we make it less for the towns? Well, the way we make it less for the towns is by cutting programs or people, right? Like, and that's the simple answer to that is if we task administration to cut, $1 million from the budget, they'd have to tell us how they're going to do that. And that would come from people and textbooks and combinations of things, right? It's really up to the full committee how they want to vote, and this committee what they want to recommend. I suspect if we make a large cut before we go to the towns beyond what we're preparing, I don't think we'll get 15 votes on Monday. I don't know if we'll get 15 votes on Monday with what we're preparing, presenting for here either, but at least a step in the right direction.
We are making a cut, but a lot of what I think this does as presented, at least how I understood it, is rearranges things to be charged toward the grants. It doesn't actually, it does make some cuts, but it's mostly rearranging things. So they're coming out of grants instead of out of our general fund. So we're still funding a lot of the same things. That was my understanding?
Yes.
Because we've already cut a lot, honestly, when we've not added things. I guess my other related question is, because you haven't figured out what is going on with the rest of ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 when it comes out, and there's a lot of unknowns around that, but also a lot of money with that. Are there other expenses that you anticipate we don't know about yet that might be charged to those? I'm thinking of things that have come up in the past. Like, I know you've talked about maybe hiring someone to help with some of the grants management, or maybe hiring someone to help with the testing, tracing, things like that would very definitively be tied to COVID and grants. I'm just thinking through what the towns might say if they see things like that, which are, you know, regardless
Yeah,
of
I
if they're
mean,
justified.
Malay, if we're at the point where let's just say we go back to school in the fall and
Yeah.
they're not covering the costs associated with pool testing, and we're still going to pool test. Well,
Mhm.
that's
That'll
really
come out of
really
grants.
expensive, and that's going to take up a huge chunk of money.
Yeah.
Plus, and that's personnel, and it's bringing it to Cambridge every day. It's an expensive venture. So yeah, I could see that being part of it. But
Okay.
you said it well before. Most of this is getting covered. It's not real reductions. It's just we're covering it with the grant money that we have available now. So it puts us in the same situation. We're still getting what we need to get, and we're lowering the budget. By $500,000.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. I think we need to be very clear that that's what we're doing.
Yep.
Because people also have, some people I've heard from have a perception that towns and school districts across the country have this windfall of money coming, and don't understand, where it's actually going and that there's expenses behind it. They just think you have all this money, so why are you asking for more? So I think anything we can do to emphasize that that's what we're doing, we're using these grant funds to cover these things so we can lower your assessments, is helpful.
And I can tell you, I've talked to people at the state level in DESE, and they've said, "Hey, listen, we're not going to probably." And I was in specifically Malay. I talked to Rob Curtin about, Rob O'Donnell, Dan. Rob O'Donnell's the one in finance. So I spoke with him specifically about the $40 million, and he said, "Listen, so much money has come into the state and to communities via the federal grants that they're just saying, we're not going to put any more money at that level." So they were pretty clear about that. But I've heard some other things on the side. So they're saying, "Hey, fill these gaps." So even the towns are getting a decent amount of money out of these grants. So these funds are coming in. I think Holden's getting over 5, Rutland's getting over 3. So they're going to be seeing money. What those are going to go toward, again, it could probably be a myriad of things that can help cover not only costs of overtime for things or COVID related items, but I think those items are going to shrink pretty quickly once everyone is vaccinated and we've kind of gone through this process. So I still think the communities are going to be in pretty good shape after this is over as well.
Malaya, we are good to go with SO2. It's SO3. That's the one that we're still waiting for some guidance on. Just a point of clarity. That's kind of up in the air still.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
I'll just jump in real quick. In layman's terms, I'm just going to sort of reclassify. I think Malaya just kind of did what I want to do as well. But basically, with grants, with reallocation of the SR2 funds, having needing to be spent by whatever date and so forth. And then I guess the big piece that I'm still not the E&D as far as that being the $200,000. What percentage or where are we at with that as it stands? Meaning how much did we bring forward or how much do we allocate for the budget? And then now using that amount that you gave us, how much is left?
So we allocated 750. This would push it to 950. Dan, what does that give us left over?
So we had 1.4 that was approved when it was certified last December. Don't forget too, we have to keep in mind that we had money brought forward from FY20 into 21 that now falls to our bottom line. And we did make a payment. Again, we talked about this at our last meeting. I think right now the unencumbered balance in transportation from 2021 was $350,000. I mean, I've got it here, and that was the end result of the payment to AA. As you know, we're still negotiating with Vanpool, and that's in process. So that 350-ish could be a little bit more depending upon how those negotiations come out.
Is there a time frame on that?
Well, there is positively. That needs to be done. I would say by June 1st, at the absolute latest. I mean, Darryl gave me direction today, and I did speak to council. The bottom line is that if there is no resolution, then that money gets closed out. You've seen the report. I'm just trying to be sensitive to negotiations. That's all I'm saying here. You saw my budget report. You saw what's sitting there. If there is no resolution, that encumbrance gets closed out, so that gets added to the free 350 that's sitting there. That falls to our bottom line in 21. Then the problem becomes. So then, what do we use as a funding source to make that payment to that provider if indeed we still want to go forward? I have had conversations with Desi about that because I have a recommendation, and I had a very, very, very brief conversation with Jay Sullivan, Social Commissioner for School Finance, and it's to be continued in terms of how to resolve that. But one other way of paying for that, which we don't want to go down that road, is that we'd have to tap into E&D when it gets certified next year. And that certification process won't be probably the earliest, again, let's say December of 21. So it would be January before we could even consider looking at that. And again, as you may know, for us to tap into that, it requires Dower reaching out to the 5 towns and making them aware and so on and so forth. Very similar to what we did, seems like 3 years ago, when we tapped into E&D for $250K for the field at the high school.
So one last time, if someone wants to make a motion, to some extent, my recommendation or my suggestion is to make a motion to accept the revised budget appropriation numbers presented to us tonight and recommend that to the full committee. That's, again, I can't make a motion, so y'all can make that or not. Or we can make some other motion. Personally, I don't see how, unless there's more information we need that would change our opinion, I don't know that we would meet on Thursday and come up with be in any different boat than we are now, unless members feel differently. So it's really, the ball is really in your virtual court.
So I don't feel that. I think you're right. I think there's probably not any other information. I personally don't feel comfortable making that motion at this point. I'll just put that out there.
Jeff, may I ask what your concerns are?
A few things. So I voted. So I had voted against the initial budget. First of all. Second of all, I'm done as of whatever May 10th or whatever the date is. And then third, I did come into this. I'll be honest. I have a pretty good understanding of how school budgets work, and this is pretty. To say layman's is sort of an oxymoron. There's a lot that goes into it. So I don't feel comfortable sort of with all those factors, making that motion. And I don't know. I mean, it's not that I wouldn't support it. I just don't feel like that's in the, does that make sense? Just being fully transparent.
No, that's good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Do either of our other members want to make that motion? If not, then what I would assume would happen is that administration would bring this proposal to the full committee on Monday night without a positive or negative recommendation from Business and Finance, and we would have this conversation again. And hopefully the chair would write the agenda such that there's a motion on the agenda that we might take up. I don't know. I can make one then, and so that we can take a vote one way or the other. We would need 15 people.
And
Ken,
is it
is the meeting
logistically better to actually have us vote on this either way, or is it better to just let the discussion wait until Monday or Wednesday, whenever it is?
There was 2 concomitant questions. I think the meeting's actually Wednesday night. Is that
It is
Dan's
Wednesday,
question?
yeah.
So
I have
Wednesday.
Monday
Yeah, I'm
stuck
just
in my head
accustomed to
'cause
Monday.
we're always Mondays.
I don't know. I mean, traditionally, the school committee operates. I mean, in the best of times, the school committee operates where subcommittees generally do deeper dives into the information than the full committee will, and makes their recommendation. This has not always been the way we've operated in practice, but normally this committee often, I don't say defers to the subcommittee, but that's generally the model of our large committee, right? Is that we deep dive here and then we make a recommendation. If we don't make a recommendation, we don't make a recommendation, and the full committee will have its say. I would say that the full committee is going to vote for or against it, whether we recommend it or not. So in a way, it doesn't matter. It's probably not a super positive signal if the committee didn't recommend it, though.
Ken, if I can make a suggestion, perhaps we if that we disregard meeting on Thursday evening, but that we look to have another meeting next Monday night, if need be. Darryl and I, if need be, I don't know. I mean, we can we can put it out there. I mean, again, maybe we don't need to meet Monday night.
I don't see the purpose unless people here say, "Hey, Monday, I'm going to be ready to vote." I think that unless there's some, if people in the call have information they want presented to them that they don't currently have, that would change their mind, I would think, yes, let's find a time to meet. If we're just going to come back and have the same conversation on another night that we're not with our families or with, or having dinner or whatever we'd be having, for you too, both of you, I don't find there being great value in that, unless there's going to be a change in what people know or want to talk about. That's just my take, Joe. I don't know what your situation is.
No, I agree. I think this is, we're not going to make modifications to what we're going to present. Again, we have to present the changes associated with, and this was the catalyst for this. One was looking at the grants and how we're able to divvy those up now. But the second one was the fact that we can't use the ESSER 2 funds in the same way to offset. So we do have to go back in and make a modification anyway. So I think when we're looking at this, we're saying, okay, let's do this at once. It'll bring the total overall dollar amount down. I think we get to Rutland's number, believe it or not, or pretty darn close. I think it's under 5. Holden, I know they were looking for $1 million, but I think $1.3 million. And Chris, you don't have to say yay or nay, but I think 1.3 is something we could probably get through. I'm hopeful for. Carl, I'm not sure about Paxton. I think it brought it down $60,000 or $70,000. It's still down in the low threes, and I know that's still a lot. And I think that still puts I think you'd still be off by about $140,000 in terms of the budget. So I know that's something you'd still be working on. And Sterling and Princeton, they're both in really good shape. I mean, they're like the opposite.
If we cut more, they'll be negative.
I know.
I mean, they will.
Them. I know. So that's why when we're looking at this, and yes, in my experience in sitting in these meetings since 2007, let's say, typically when a subcommittee comes in with a yay or a nay, it really kind of helps drive the conversation, because this is where the heavy duty conversation occurs. And then at the main meeting, it does help support, or it maybe dissuades people from supporting it. So
So Ken, if I can, I mean, at least add in, I mean, at least so, I mean, kind of, I can share where I'm coming from because I know that's kind of leads dodging around. I mean, so I appreciate the updates and the information from administration and then actually you Ken as well, just in terms of how, like for Paxton, how we got to the highest percentage and happened to be that we had the smallest decrease in our enrollment of the 5 towns. Okay, that's the way it is. That's the way it's set up. So I got it. I guess we can't do anything about that. So that's just the way it rolls. And like in looking at, so I'm closer. So of course I voted no last time as well, but I'm closer to yes than I was before. And so that it's moving closer to where I think I could vote yes for it. And it's getting closer there, but I don't think it's quite there yet. So for me, there's 2 things though. So one is again, like with the budget for next year and that kind of those specific numbers. But the second thing is, and I think I had alluded to it and we talked for a little bit about it at our last meeting in terms of kind of ways that we could structurally kind of change what we do, possibly kind of saving us some money in regards to with our out of district special ed. Again, because as we've talked through, like last year we had 68 students, which is after circuit breaker, it's about a net charge of 60,000 per student. That's after you take into your circuit breaker reimbursements. And so but I don't know what our 68 population looks like. But if, for example, if we could hire one person that could work with 2 students, you're adding one person to save you 120. And so it seems like there might be kind of some long-term options there, but I don't know. And I don't know if, like, working with Director Smith, if you've been able to kind of comb that over and say, oh, maybe if we hired one person that could do this, we could then keep 3 out-of-district SPED students back in because now we can provide those services that otherwise we can't. And so while it costs us, say, 100,000 to hire someone, we're saving 180 net. And so that's kind of like a long-term something that could structurally help us out. And because again, that's kind of savings by keeping folks in district. But
so I can so 2 things. So we have multiple programs throughout the district-wide special ed programs that house a huge number of kids who would typically go out of district. So, and we've been doing this for years, and we add additional staff, Carl. So if we have, let's just say we have enough of a critical number of students that we can have in a classroom, let's say multisensory reading program, whatever it is. We can bring those kids together, hire a teacher, probably a paraprofessional or 2, and then you're exactly right. We can save, funds on out of district transportation because we don't get reimbursed, and we can keep the kids in district, which is kind of like the goal. We want the kids here, so that's what we want to do. We spend an awful lot of time doing that. So, and we really do exhaust every avenue before we send a student out of district. So, 68 students out of 7,000 is a really good number. It's very low as a district, in terms of the ratios, because we have so many in-district programs, and we actually have so many in-district programs. We have families that move to our district because they know we have good in-district programs. So, I think that says a lot about kind of how we've moved forward. To your first point, though, I guess you didn't you didn't support the first one because the budget was higher. This one's lower. And I think part of it is if we go into, a vote on Wednesday night, what we're just trying to do is get this to a point where we're trying to get it passed. If we can get it passed, that would, we're not going to get to a number that's going to be, I can't bring the budget down another $1.4 million, which is what we would still need to do to get to Paxton's number. It couldn't happen. So But what we are doing is we're using those offsets. We're trying to, tap into these ESSER, and they're one-time funds, tap into these to help pay for these things that we had budgeted. We had put $200,000 in FY22 for PPE. Well, now we're going to just switch that out so we can bring that whole number down. We're doing everything we can to get that dollar amount down. Again, once we get into the 2%, the 1%, 1.5%, increase range, as Ken said, that's what we're going to start tapping into people and stuff, and typically you start with stuff and then you get into people. But we saw what happened last year where we did our, 50 reductions of teachers and, the pink slips. And it was, it cost us, an awful lot of money to start off the year with just in unemployment. So what we're trying to do is just not be in that world, see if we can, somehow meet 4 of the 5 towns if humanly possible. And then go from there.
And I appreciate that. And certainly the extra information that you had in regards to kind of how we work through kind of what we do with our special ed programs and kind of trying to maximize that. And it's the first I've heard it. And so it's good to know that we're at least chasing all those leads down. Like I said, because it's obviously we're never going to be able to do 100% of our students. And it's just, we could, but not unless like Elon Musk decides that he's going to start cutting $1 billion every year to every district in the country that starts with a W.
It'd be nice.
So, so that it's good to hear that we're at least doing kind of our due diligence to try and do as much as we can to keep as many folks as we can. And not that we should be intentionally not letting folks go out of district if we can't meet that, because we're not going to be able to meet it for everyone. But
no. And you're exactly right. So yeah, thank you. And again, that's something that we've been doing for a long time, and we do really strong programs in the district. I think it's just a matter of us, looking at it. And there are some kids that need more support than we can provide. And there are students who are like that. We don't have the capacity to do it. And there are that's why there are specialized programs out there that do this, and the state approves those programs, and where we end up sending them out with parents' permission.
And I'll just say that this comes up next week on Wednesday. I may vote yes. I'm at this point right now, because I just haven't kind of mulled things over and thought things through. So I don't if we were to have a vote right now, maybe I'd abstain. Maybe I don't know. I wouldn't vote yes to recommend it because I'm not ready to recommend it. But on Wednesday, maybe after, like I said, thinking things through, looking at things, maybe at that point I may say, yeah, it's closer. I think we can send it forward. So that's just kind of, to be frank, that's kind of where I'm at right now. So.
No, I appreciate that. Thanks for, and again, I appreciate when you all just are like, hey, here's how I'm feeling about this. We're not trying to pressure you. If the will of the subcommittee is not to make a recommendation at this time, one way or the other, that's fine. With us on the administrative side as well.
Go ahead, Ken. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ken.
I was going to say, I think that, I would be inclined, of course, to support this on Wednesday night because it's getting us closer to where some of the towns need to be. I think we want to be careful with our what we say and also what we mean. We really ideally want to meet the financial needs of all 5 of our towns and not just 4. We can't always do that, right? But it's not a race to 4, right? It's trying to balance, the needs of the kids in the district and the needs of the towns, and the kids also live in the districts, right? Towns, they need police, and they need fire, and they need libraries and whatnot. They're members of their community. So I just want to be careful that we get into that phraseology where we're talking about, you know, it's not really a race to the fourth town, because you never know who when you're going to be that fifth town as well, right? Holden was in that boat, not in my time on the district, but definitely before my time on the district. Holden was the town that was struggling, and may soon be, you know, again, given Mr. Challenger's letter. It gets us closer to where we need to be. I mean, I'm just thinking practically speaking too, like I think this motion, if it's made, is an improvement for all the towns over where we are, right? It may not be all the towns want us to be. I would say my anticipation, I am only one vote, like there's 21 other votes on the committee. I think that there will not be a lot of taste from some of the people who voted yes to significantly make deep cuts in programming until the voters had a chance to say no. But I could be wrong. People could change that mode. Emily, what is your thought? Sorry.
Did Dan have something he was going to say? Did I hear that?
Ken, just looking at this very quickly. For Holden, for example, the difference between the budget approved in March 15th and the budget today, reflecting the $500,000 cuts. You know, Holden's increase goes from 1.6 to 1.3, so they pick up, you know, 300,000, almost 360,000. Paxton goes from 376 to 312. So again, they picked up you know, 64,000 in change. Princeton picks up almost 72,000. Rutland picks up almost 193,000, and Sterling picks up 160,000. So the total, again, just very round numbers, is almost $850,000. 848 and change.
Sorry. Again, I'd be one who would vote in favor of it. I just want to say we want to be careful in how we think about picking money up, right? So if the towns are telling us we don't have this money, and now we're telling them, well, here's less money that you still don't have, they're really not picking anything up, right? They're just less deep in the hole. So I just think we want to be careful about how we present that. As in the past, you know, people talk about cuts to budgets. You know, we don't have a budget until the towns vote on it, right? So we're really not cutting anything until there's actually a voted on budget or not, right? So I just think we want to be careful in our words and careful in, you know, how we respect what we're hearing from the towns. Even going from 1.7 to 1.3 for Holden, you know, it's still $1.3 million increase in, you know, a year where they're money about because of stimulus, but money about because of stimulus because this was, you know, one of the worst years in the history of our lifetimes, right? Financially, not necessarily for the government who has printed money and given other governments money, but for the actual people in the towns, right, who are paying taxes and seeing their tax bills go up. You know, I'm not fortunately in that situation, but some of our colleagues are in the situation, our towns members of, you know, having significant reductions in their income last year, right? So any increase or even a status quo is something I think we want to be respectful for when we use, you know, the language of we're increasing it less. I think we have to because we have contractual obligations and we have obligations to our students, just might me personally. But I think we want to be cautious and realizing that any increase in this year is going to be borne by people who, you know, don't work for the government and may have seen a substantial hit to their savings and their well-being. Malay, were you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think what I was going to ask. Sorry. I was going to ask a question about E&D again, because I know we talked about the amount in E&D. Did we talk about the percentage of E&D and what that would be if we do this, at least temporarily, until this year's would be certified? What would it drop it down to?
So actually, we're looking to keep it at or about the 1%, and that's assuming that you know, we've got the 350 in FY20. That's, in essence, in FY21. So that's going to fall to the bottom line, and depending upon what happens with negotiations of the other provider, that number could be 350 or it could be 350
Yeah.
plus.
I mean, we don't know, so I'm not counting on that going up because we don't know yet. I was just where we are now. If we take this additional $200,000 out versus where we were on March 15th, I was curious what that difference is and where it would leave us.
Well, with things we've been told that we feel confident about, it'd be about $410,000 plus. It would be, I mean, $510,000.
Yeah,
rather,
plus like the
plus the
350.
350. So that's 860 plus whatever falls
Okay.
out this year. So we'd be
Okay.
at the minimum 0.9% plus whatever else, not just from the transportation, but whatever else falls to the bottom line, because things do fall to the bottom line.
Right.
To the best that Dan tries, is not going to be a 0.00 in the book, and it can't be negative, so it has to be something
Right.
that would get added to that.
It
So we'd
wouldn't
probably
be-
be in the 1%. It wouldn't be what we have now, I would assume, but it would be 1% ish.
It wouldn't be much worse than what we agreed to theoretically in March. So that's what I was trying to sort out. So, okay. So I reluctantly voted for the budget in March. I wasn't thrilled with the big picture, but it is what it is. So given that this is less than the budget in March, I'll move that we accept it. It is moving in the right direction. It is still not ideal, but I think it's moving in the right direction. Or that we recommend it, right? We're not accepting it. We're recommending it.
So operationally, the other two members indicated a lack of interest in moving it. So I guess there's not going to be anybody who's able to second it.
Oh,
because by Robert's rules, the chair can't actually second a motion. But there is a motion on the floor. Is there a second, or will it die for lack of a second?
So,
That's
I mean, as a practical matter, it's unusual to second something that you wouldn't vote for, but it would give us a chance to give a committee vote up to the full committee. So the full committee could see, oh, well, sounds like they were kind of split 2-2, but then it so happened that of the 5 people who voted no, 2 of them happened to be on finance. So, there, I mean, we're not necessarily representative of the full committee. So that we can have a vote, I will second Malaya's motion.
All right, so the motion has been made and seconded and slightly discussed in between, so that's fine. Probably not by Robert rules, but that's all right. So we have a motion made and seconded, and we've discussed it for a couple of hours. I'm happy to have more discussion, or if we don't want more discussion, I can also find to call for a vote. Is people want to have more discussion on the motion on the floor?
Can I just ask one quick question? It's a 2/3 vote for the full school committee, correct?
It is 2/3 of all members, so it requires 15 people to vote yes, not just 2/3 that are there.
But don't we have one less member right now?
Has Scott been his position been filled, or are we at 21?
It still requires
they're filling
15.
it, I think after the election. I think the 24th they said.
It still requires. I'm not the chair. Mike is the one who would rule on that. My feeling is that it still requires 15. That's the number of actual members, not the numbers of seated members. And this is, I think, a debate we had a couple of years ago. It's totally up to Chair Dennis to make that ruling. If it were me, I'd say we actually still need 15.
I think you did 10 at that time.
Yeah,
you did do that, correct?
But it's up to Chair Dennis to make that interpretation of and make the ruling.
You cut out, just to clarify, you said 2/3 of those present, or 15?
No, 15.
15 regardless.
And then member Otmar was suggesting that maybe it would only be 14 since we were down a member, but that's up to Chair Dennis to vote on. But I think the way I read the law, it says that it's 15. It's 2/3 of the number of seats, not 2/3 of the seated members. So I think it should be 15, but Chair Dennis would have the right to make that ruling, not me. So the motion on the floor is to recommend that we revise the budget and appropriations as outlined in the committee, administration's report to us today. So a yes vote is just a recommendation to the full committee. A no vote is recommending against it. An abstention is, as always, an abstaining. There's no 2/3. This is just a recommendation. There's no requirement of a supermajority for that. So Shall we talk more, or are people ready to take their votes? Member Gustafson?
Yes.
Member Otmar?
No.
Member Sullivan?
No.
And Mills is yes, so it fails by a lack of a majority in favor. So we'll report that motion to recommend failed by a 2-2 vote to the full committee. And of course, members are free, as Member Dennis leads the discussion, to explain, their position as members of the full committee. All right, so I know that. I think we heard the information. We took a vote. Unless district administration is going to come back with different information, I think we are where we are for Wednesday's meeting. So I don't think we would need to meet on Thursday unless there's going to be something substantively different. Maybe if you want to sleep on it, you can let me know. But I don't see the need to rehash the same conversation. We're going to do that on Wednesday night already. So that's it. The next item on the agenda was actually, I've lost my agenda here. I can find it. It's approval of minutes, I believe. So let me find my.
It was approval of the minutes. Yes.
Do we have the date of that?
April 5th.
Thank you. So I'll take a motion to approve the meeting minutes from April 5th.
I didn't see the meeting minutes from April 5th.
Were the April 5th meetings attached?
I didn't send them out, Ken. I don't know if Randy did, but if not, then you don't have the minutes
I
there.
did not see them attached, but if it's just me, then go forth.
They were attached to the Google invite, but
I think I did see those then. Okay.
But did you see them? Because I mean, if you didn't see them, we can wait.
I think I did because I was late to the meeting. Okay. And yes, thank you. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I've lost a little track here, Mr. Secretary. Did we make a? I don't think we have a motion yet, right?
No motion yet.
No motion yet. Is there a motion to approve the
So
minutes?
moved.
So moved. Is there a second? Is there any discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, we can adopt them by unanimous consent unless there's an objection. Seeing none, the minutes are approved. So with thanks to administration and to you all and to our guests, I would take a motion to adjourn.
What? There's an item. There's an item about next meeting. Is that?
Oh, next meeting. Yeah, I thought that's a good question. I think that for my purposes, I would think that we would wait until we see the outcome of Wednesday's meeting before we would schedule the next meeting. There are two things. One is that I think by law, but or maybe it's just by precedent, I don't know. Business and Finance committees stay seated through transitional times. Now, if you're no longer a member of the committee, that may not be true if your towns have the election, but the subcommittee, this is the only subcommittee that stays seated in the transitional time between the elections and the organizational meetings, as long as all the members are still seating. So we can meet, but I don't know that when we need to until we see what happens on Wednesday. And then I think also what happens with respect to the town elections, town meetings.
Ken, does our ad hoc committee stay seated?
I think Business and Finance is the only one that stays technically seated until the reorganization, but that's really Chair Dennis's decision, not mine, because he's responsible for subcommittees. And of course, Superintendent McCollar or Director Deedy can request that we meet as well. But
that was the last item on the agenda.
Okay,
so.
Thank you. Seeing that, though, I'm still happy if someone was to make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we'll see if we can agree on this one. So, Member Gustafson?
Yes.
Member Otmar?
Yes.
Member Sullivan?
Yes.
And Mills is yes. So we are adjourned. Thank you all, and have a good evening, everybody. And thanks to administration for all their work pulling this together.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you, guys.
Have a good evening.